I think I have to stay fairly close to this microphone, which is going to be a little bit awkward for me. You know, I like to be floundering around and moving my hands and doing all sorts of things. But let me begin by kind of telling you what we're going to do and why we're doing it. Of all the things in Judaism, probably we are known for two really important ones that separate us from all the other nations. And because of that, the other nations, when they have been in control of us, they have wanted us to not be able to observe these two things. The first is Shabbat, and the second is Kashrut. There's Brit Milah, and there's all the other celebration of holidays and everything, but probably the two most outstanding things that Jews are famous for is the celebration of Shabbat and Kashrut. And what is it when we were under Greek and Roman and every other religion, they wanted us to work on Shabbat. So it's so important, it's so essential to Judaism, and yet, and I'll say for myself too, before I studied this, I didn't realize how fascinating it is for the evolution of Shabbat from what it was from day one, or day 7, I guess I should say, from what it was from the original day 7 to how we celebrate Shabbat today. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, first of all, the Tanakh, and we're going to see how the issue of Shabbat evolved through the Tanakh, through the Torah, because there are differences from the beginning of the Torah to the end of the Torah, or as some of us will say, there are differences from one author who wrote parts of the Torah and another author who wrote other parts of the Torah. And then all through the prophets and the writings, there are all sorts of things that layer upon layer gets added to our concept of how we deal with this unique idea. And I really recommend very strongly, if you really want to read something that is so beautifully written, so spiritual, and so moving, it's Abraham Joshua Heschel's book, The Sabbath. You can read it in several hours. It's a small little book. You can get it for $8 or $10 through Amazon. And it is such a powerful, powerful book. I want to give you a little story to introduce the concept of Shabbat. Because sometimes we ourselves, we're so used to Shabbat that we don't realize how unique and special it is compared to any other religion, any other culture in the entire world. Has nothing that comes close to Shabbat. Somewhere around 2001, 2002, Fran and I were in China. We were the guests of Johnson & Johnson Corporation, and I was working in a number of hospitals in China. And we had a couple who were our hosts there. He was the director of marketing for the cardiovascular division of Johnson & Johnson, and his wife, and they were just lovely young people, probably in their early 30s. And when we were in Beijing, I had already connected before we left the States with a Chabad rabbi, through our Chabad rabbis here, and knew that he ran a service in one of the hotels. And I called him up like on Wednesday that we were there, and he said, yes, come at this time. We have a wonderful service. We have 40 or 50 people who come. We have dinner afterwards. And I said, okay. And I told our hosts that we were going to do that. And they said, gee, do you think it would be all right if we came with you? I said, well, I wouldn't have any problem, but out of courtesy, let me call the rabbi. And of course, the rabbi said, of course, bring them. So we went, and most of the people there were not Orthodox Jews. They were Jewish business people who were settled there for months or years at a time doing business. Many of them were Israelis. There were a few from the States, and then there were tourists from all around the world. There were actually probably close to 60 or 70 people. And we went through a beautiful Kabbalat Shabbat service, and then sang and danced and ate, and people talked, and it was just an overwhelmingly beautiful Friday evening. And as we're walking, and I can picture where he really said it to me, we had just walked out of this hall that it was set up in, and we're walking down the corridor of the hotel. And he looked at me and he said, "You do this every week?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, we do this every week." And he said, "Maybe when we celebrate the New Year's, we have a celebration, but it's all just flowers and bands and marching and things like that. I've never in my life," and he was a fairly religious person, "I've never in my life seen anything like this." And it just shows the uniqueness of the Shabbat, that not only do we treat it with such incredible reverence and joy and celebration, but we do it every single week. And it doesn't matter, because it's just as joyful one week as it is the week before, or it will be the week after. So it's an incredible thing that the Jewish people have. And it's fascinating to see how this whole concept grew up from the very beginning of time. So I want you to know that I've gotten so good with PowerPoint that there are sound effects on here, but unfortunately, this is a big room, and you have to be very quiet when I change slides so that you can hear the sound effects. I wish you could hear. Let me see if I can go out of this and come back to this one, because this has a great sound effect. So, okay, where does it all start? I can see how moved you were by the sound effects. I was just overwhelmed with all the effort that I put into this to entertain you. Where does it all start? Where is the first time in recorded literature that we talk about this idea of some special day? Well, it's those who can read, and I'm sorry it's a little bit far away. Can you guys see it from back there? Probably not. It's from Genesis chapter 2, which is actually a mistake. It should be in the end of chapter 1 and not the beginning of chapter 2. The rabbis had nothing to do with dividing up these chapters and verses. This was done by the Greeks when they translated it into Greek, and even they did not realize that two separate people wrote the first chapter of Bereshit and the second chapter of Bereshit. And this, which talks about this seventh day, should have been the end of chapter 1, and then the beginning of chapter 2 gives an entirely different narration about creation. And of course the rabbis come up with all of their interesting midrashim and meforshim as their explanations as to why these are so different. And again, that's a matter of choice. If you believe that it was all dictated by God, that's fine. It doesn't change the narrative at all. But anyway, it starts with what we say. And when do we say it? Every Friday night before we do Kiddush. Vayechulu hashamayim, vayechulu hashamayim. So, but there are some things that I want to go sentence by sentence and point out some things that are really rather interesting. First, and I've got the Hebrew here and I've tried to put the Hebrew on most of these slides, because even though if you don't speak Hebrew, it's not really important. If you can't read it, it's not important. Because unfortunately, English translations are really editorials by the people who are doing the translating. And sometimes they're intentional, that they're trying to make a point. So if you read a conservative or a reform translation, it will be different from what the Orthodox do. And sometimes it's just a matter of not really, whoever's doing the translating, not really understanding the subtlety of some of the words. So how does it start out? And remember, this is now 6 days of creation went by. it ends with, and God saw it was good, and evening, and then morning, the sixth day. Okay, the sixth day is finished. So now it starts out, and the heaven and the earth were finished. Vayechu is correct translation. They were finished. That's the passive. They were finished, and all of their hosts, the cults of Allah. And on the seventh day, God completed his work. Again, the verb vayachal, to finish something. And you'll see, or maybe you won't see, that the Hebrew is very klutzy, very clumsy Hebrew in some of this. And it's really hard to understand why it was put together like this. But so he completed the work he had done, and he abstained on the seventh day from all his work. Vayishbot bayom hashvi'i. Vayishbot. Well, anybody can see that the shin bet taf is the root of the word Shabbat. It does not mean rest. It has nothing to do with rest. It has to do with the cessation of doing something. In Israel, when you have a strike, they use this term, lishbot, to strike, to stop working. And so that it really, those people who think that right away it was made for a day of rest, in the original description, rest has nothing to do with anything. So, on the seventh day he abstained, so he abstained on the seventh day from all his work which he had made, and God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. So what does that mean? I mean, this is the beginning of the Torah. What does that mean? God blessed it and made it holy. Well, you have to sort of, this is a whole theological discussion of what holiness is and what it means for God to bless something. I think simplistically we can say, and the easiest way to think of it, is that it has some godly importance to it, that God has associated himself in a special way, so that on that period of time, and those of you who took the course on Sacred Time, Sacred Space, we talked about this a little bit, in terms of the fact that there is something that God has made special about this day, that he himself, whether it's he makes himself more available to us, or we have a chance to slow down and really reach out to him on this special day. But whenever we talk about holiness, we're really talking about the closeness to God. And on this special day, he hallowed it, he made it holy, because he abstained from all his work. Again, the word kivo Shabbat. Here's Shabbos right there. Kivo Shabbat. He ceased from his work. He didn't rest. Because after all, resting for God, what does that mean? It's a very anthropomorphic concept, to rest. God gets tired, so he needed a break. You don't even think of resting when you turn down. Ceasing from the work that he was doing, that's a whole different story. That's not really anthropomorphic. But the concept of his resting is truly anthropomorphic. He abstained from all his work which God in creating had made. And again, there's a little bit of klutziness in the Hebrew here, and people translate it. There's 1,000 different ways to translate it. It's irrelevant. It's close enough. So there are a few things that are interesting, and this is it, okay? When is the next time in the Torah that the whole concept of this day, this special day, comes up? Anybody know?
Ten Commandments?
No, it comes up before the Ten Commandments. We'll get to it. I can tell you that we don't see it for the entire rest of Breshit. There is not any allusion to this concept in the entire. What does that mean? That means that the patriarchs knew nothing about Shabbat. They didn't observe Shabbat. They didn't know about Shabbat. Now, what do the rabbis do? The rabbis give you this wonderful midrash that, oh, all of them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they knew the entire Torah, the entire Tanakh. They studied in yeshivot, and they knew everything. And, you know, it's a way of saying, well, wait a second, we're doing all these things that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't do. What's the necessity of it all? But the fact is that if you read the Torah, you find out that the patriarchs knew nothing about Shabbat. So it doesn't show up at all in the entire narrative up through going down to Egypt, okay? And we'll leave it there for a second. What else do you notice about this? What is missing in this?
What's word?
What's missing is there's no commandment to do anything. It doesn't say, so God said that you shouldn't work, or you should abstain from work, or you should rest, or you should do anything else. There's absolutely nothing in here that sounds like it's a requirement for mankind. On the other hand, one would ask, why did the author of this particular paragraph, be that God or man, it's totally irrelevant, why did he not finish up with a statement? And for that reason, God made the seventh day a holy day for all mankind to abstain from all kinds of work. It's an interesting concept, because here's the beginning of it, and yet there's absolutely nothing that's included in here about a commandment to not only, obviously there were no Jewish people at this point, there were no, there were just Adam and Eve at this point. But why didn't he make this a commandment for all time, for all people? And we're going to talk about that if we get to it today. If not, we'll certainly talk about it next week when we get to other paragraphs and we say, aha, that's why it wasn't written as an edict for mankind. So here's another interesting, and again, you have to read very carefully. And on the seventh day, God what? He completed his work.
He was working.
Well, wait a second.
He was working.
He was working on the seventh day. If he completed his work, it doesn't say he completed it on the sixth day and didn't work on the seventh day. In this particular pasuk, and it says it very, very carefully, Vayakal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i. He finished it on the seventh day. So now how do you deal with this? We know that there's no description of anything that he created on the seventh day. So how do you deal with that? Leave it to the rabbis. Said he created menucha. He created rest on the seventh day, because the concept of rest had never been there. So for the sake of mankind, on the seventh day, he created rest. What's that? Somebody speak up.
No, I'm trying to read, it doesn't say that either.
What's that? No, it doesn't say that. That's a rabbinic, that's a midrashic concept that he created rest on the seventh day. But it does say that he finished his work on the seventh day. It doesn't say that he finished it on the sixth day. So in order to explain that, the rabbis have come up with this concept of creating rest. Yeah.
That whole paragraph contradicts itself, because it says he completed his work on the seventh day, and then it says he abstained.
On the seventh day.
Okay,
from
on
his
the,
work.
and God, blessed the seventh day and hallowed it.
Don't forget, abstain is probably not the best word. He came to an end. He ceased. It's like you're driving down a road and you put the brakes on and you stop. So it's not that he abstained on the seventh day, is that he ceased from doing what he was doing on the seventh day. And that's where it's so important about the subtleties of the translation of those words.
But he also worked, and then he stopped working. Is that?
Well, that's what if you read it literally and you translate it precisely in terms of what those words mean, that's exactly what it says, is that he was going on working, and then he ceased from that work on the seventh day. He came to an abrupt halt on the seventh day. But up until that halt, he was still working.
It was working.
You know, so again, the rabbis explain this simply by saying that he created the concept of rest on the seventh day, and then he did nothing further. So what's that? And sometimes some people just cannot rest, so it's...
If you consider the 6 days, in the 6 days, it's very clear what he's doing from day 1 through 6. He's always creating something, right?
All right.
Very
That's on the
specific.
seventh
When you
day.
get day 7, what does he create?
Rest.
And you can say he's created the abstention.
which is, in human terms, which is rest.
And we don't even understand
Restfulness.
this concept.
So the question now comes up, as I asked before, where does this show up again in the Torah? Where does the idea? Rabbi.
I'm going to be leaving in a few minutes, so I have to get this off my chest.
I was afraid of that.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I ain't going to...
Okay. There's, as Barry says, there's so much that is embedded into these words. And there's so much interpretation when you translate. So let me give you one form of interpretation which comes from the word itself. I'll give you a little bit of an indication as to why it makes sense. It says, Vayechulu hashamayim ve'haaretz, which some people say, and everything, what does it say? The heaven and were finished. It's one way to say it. However, the word Vayechulu comes from the root word of kol. Lichlol means, or all, means that everything is contained therein. So everything in the heaven and the earth and all their host was already there. It was already contained. Whatever will ever be was already there. In potentiality, all of the universe was already in place. By when? By the seventh day. Now, it also says, Vayechal Elohim bayom hashvi'i. So if I say that the word Vayechulu means that it contained, so all of the universe, the heaven, the earth, and all the host is already contained therein, and everything that shall ever be. So now there's some kind of a mystical little message here with the same word usage, Vayechal Elohim. So on that seventh day, it's not that God finished, it's God is present and is contained within the sense of the seventh day. The holiness of the day itself is the containment of God. Now I know that doesn't sound like the straight kind of translation that we have in our book, because it's not going to be translated the way it's too cumbersome. But notice the fact that the Hebrew language is filled with symbolism. So when you read this thing, it, as Barry says, it's very cumbersome, deliberately so, because it's giving us messages that are embedded on top of other messages and other messages. But the essential message is that the Shabbat itself is a containment of holiness. And if we consider the theology of it all, that the divine, the holy, is encapsulated, and we can recapture it every week by being part of something that is so extraordinary as that which contains the Almighty. So the containment of the Almighty is Vayechal. One last thing that I have to say, and I have to run, so Barry's not going to kill me for talking too much, but it says here, Mikol melachto asher asa, which has been translated over and over again, and it irks me when I hear the word work. God did not work. The word melacha is a very particular word. Avodah is work. Avodah is labor. That's not what this is. Melacha is distinctively, uniquely a word that describes that which we are going to learn from God, that which we're going to learn for our own lives. So it does not say don't work. Not in the Hebrew. It says melacha is that which is thoughtful, creative, a process that is way beyond that which is labor. A laborer does not have to think. A guy that's working on the assembly line can put those, those screws into the machine and into the car or whatever it is that they're building without thinking. There's no creative process there. But when you have the person who's creating, when you have above the person, when you have the creator that's creating, whatever it is that the endeavor that is happening, it's a creative process. And that is what ceases to unreal on that day, which contains it all. So when does it contain all of it? When the creator decides, now I can cease from this creative endeavor. If you take an artist who's sitting there with a clump of clay, and they can wiggle the clay, and then all of a sudden they have a shape. And if they're not done in the creative process, they can keep wiggling it and keep changing it until they have enough stuff and they say, that's it. At this point, the creative endeavor ceases. What I have contains everything I want to convey. So you have the creator who's satisfied with whatever it is that's contained within, and says, that's it. This is where it ceases, it contains everything that it needs to contain. I no longer unreal more creativity and more stuff that doesn't exist and into existence. And this particular time of cessation and stopping from this creative endeavor is a containment of a new concept which is called sanctity, which is known as Shabbat. So now that I gave Barry a little bit of a hard time, I'm going to give him back to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the full sequence. It's going to be absolutely extraordinary. Shabbat really is something to re-examine, re-examine, and re-examine every single week. Shalom.
I thought that was actually really beautiful, I have to tell you. Sort of Kabbalistic, and this actually when you read the Kabbalists about Shabbat, you find varying concepts about this creative thing, with many saying that everything was created before this process even started, and that God just revealed it. It was in its unrevealed state. The entire world and everything was created before the first pasuk here in Bereshit, and that what God did was He made it visible to mankind during that period of time, and that's lovely. All the Kabbalistic stuff is beautiful, and sort of later in the program, not today, but in this series, we'll probably get into a little of that. So, this is a very fascinating beginning, and now I'll tell you the next time that it shows up, this concept, the next time it shows up is already well into the book of Exodus. The children of Israel have already left Egypt. They've already gone through the Sea of Reeds. And what are they doing? They're complaining, and they're miserable, and they don't have water, and they don't have food, and they don't have this, and they don't have that. So what does God give them? Manna. God gives them manna from heaven. And how is this said? It starts out with this sentence, which said, "Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will cause to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not." So this is almost like a test for them to see whether they're going to follow God's commandment, because this is one of the very, very first commandments that God is giving them. Here you've got this, and I'm telling you, you go out and you pick it up every single evening, or every single day. However, the next sentence says, "And it shall come to pass on the 6th day, v'hayom b'yom hashishi, that they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." It's a fascinating sentence, because we normally think that they go out there, and there's twice as much there on Friday. And later on, the book will tell us exactly why, so that they don't have to go out and gather on Saturday. But what does it really say here? They shall prepare that which they bring in. That's the amount that they usually bring in. They're going to prepare it. And what's going to happen to it? Here's the miracle. And it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So in this pasuk, because there are conflicting psukim here, in this pasuk it says they're going to pick up the same amount on Friday, but they're going to prepare it. And the miracle of Shabbat is that there's going to be twice as much there. And there's a long section here that talks about it, but I left out some of it. And what it says there is that God told them, take no more, no less, and you're supposed to eat it all on that day, and you don't leave it over at night. And of course, being the children of Israel, they did exactly what they weren't supposed to do. And if they left it overnight, it rotted and it got worms. And that's what the Torah said. So now we have an issue. Wait a second. If they're getting twice as much of the same stuff on Friday, and they're leaving it overnight, on Saturday morning, what are they going to see? Worms and rot. Second miracle. When they did that, as you'll see when we'll read it in a second, it was perfectly fine. So now you've got really two miracles. One is that they gathered the same amount, and somehow or another it doubled in the preparation process. And the second is that it didn't rot, and they had, there was no means of treating it in any way that would preserve it. So two miracles involved with the man. So I'm just going to read this to you, and we'll stop. I've got some words underlined, and we'll make some comments as we go along. And it came to pass that on the sixth day, now remember there's this whole section above it that I just said, where it talks about some of them gathered too much, some of them gathered too little, some of them left it overnight and it was rotten, so there's a lot going on. But now it finishes up with this section. And it came to pass on the sixth day, they gathered twice. Now here there's a slight contradiction, because here it does say they gathered twice as much bread. And that's the way the Hebrew says it. So, again, there's two slightly conflicting psukim here as to whether they actually gathered the same amount and it turned into double the amount, or whether they did gather twice the amount. 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. So they came and said, wait a second, what did they come to tell him? They came to tell him, wait a second, this is a great law you just gave us, this is a great rule that just came down, except we know if we leave this overnight, it's going to rot away. So the leaders came and said, this doesn't make any sense, because they did not anticipate this second miracle of the man. So they told Moses, and he said unto them, this is that which the Lord hath spoken. Tomorrow is a solemn rest, a holy Sabbath. Now, first time the word Shabbat is used in the Torah is in reference to the man, to the manna from heaven. So in Breshit, it's that word, the verb to cease from doing what you're doing is used, but the day is not labeled. It is not called Shabbat. This is the first time in the Torah that Shabbat appears. It is a holy Shabbat unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake, and seethe that which ye will seethe, and all that remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. So you prepare it the same way as you've been doing all week, eat the amount that you want, and what you're going to leave over, because you've got twice as much there, you're going to have in the morning. And they laid it up till the morning as Moses bade, and it did not rot, neither was there any worm therein. And this is reference to the section that we did not read. And Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath. Again, the word Sabbath used, unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. So if they went out looking for it, the man is not there in the field today. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath. In it there shall be none. There will be no man that you can find. And it came to pass on the 7th day that there were those who went out, some of the people to gather, and they found none. I mean, is that typical? I mean, Sam would have gone out just to see. Maybe it's out there, and if it is out there, I'm going to get it. So naturally, there were a group who wanted to test everything to the limit, and God was not really happy with that. And the Lord said unto Moses, how long do these guys refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath. Therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place. Let no man go out. This is very important, because you know this is where the law right here about not traveling significant distances. You're only allowed to travel a certain distance on Shabbat, and this is where it comes from. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. This is the first mention now, and this is correct. This is the first mention of the word to rest. So we have a lot of interesting things that came up here. The first use of the word Shabbat. We have the first concept of rest. And we have concept of, this is the first thing. Remember, in the first section, there were no restrictions. It didn't say, it just said this is a holy day, but it didn't say what we're supposed to do with that holy day. So this is the first time now in the Torah, and it's funny because people seem to think, gee, you know, all of this important stuff shows up into this relatively insignificant little section about delivering the man. But this is where it is, and the whole concept of rest is first mentioned in this very, very one section. Yes?
What is the Hebrew word that gets translated as rest? And what is it, what's its root? Is it, I mean, is this rest where's this concept come from? I mean,
Yeah, I thought I had the
years
Hebrew.
ago, the concept of rest was very different.
I actually thought I had the, because I wanted those available, I thought I had the actual word, and I'll give it to you right here. 16, 22, 30.
Roman phone.
Yeah, but there's several. There's Vayinofash, which has one connotation, Vayonuchu, and I'll give you the exact one that's here, 16 and 30. Okay, 1630, and it's Vayishbatu, and I take it back because that's probably not a good. Vayishbatu comes from Shabbat, and they ceased from doing what they were doing. So in actuality, that rest is probably not a good translation in this particular time. And again, that's very technical, but it is important. And you see how I just pulled this off of one of the Jewish programs on the internet just to get everything copied, so I didn't type everything up. And this was just the translation that they used. And I thought I had the Hebrew here, but I didn't copy the Hebrew on this one. So we'll probably get into rest. Maybe it's here here's where we get into the first time of rest. And I mistakenly underlined that other one, and I should have changed the wording. So now, where are we? We're somewhere between the crossing of the Red Sea, and the revelation at Sinai, okay, when we get the man. And how long a period of time is that? How many days do we count between the Exodus and between Pesach and Shavuot? And what's that? 49 days. On the 50th day we received the Torah. So somewhere within that 7-week period of time,
That's when they count the Omer.
that's when you count the Omer, between going out of Egypt and the time that we received the Torah. So somewhere between those two great events, this Mon business came up. And the next time we see this concept again is in the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. And I think we've got time to do this because again, there's so much that's fascinating in looking at each word and each concept. So what have we got so far? We have the business that God ceased from what he was doing, either on or within the seventh day. There were no commandments, there were no restrictions, he made it holy, but what did that mean at that period of time? Then we have an issue where there was a specific task that we were forbidden from doing. We were to stop collecting. We collected a double portion. By the way, the term lechem mishnah, when people have 2 challahs on Friday night, is from this double portion of man. So that was a single restriction that we had. There was no general restriction. This was just you can't go out and you can't collect, okay? So now we get to the actual commandment that talks about it. And how does it start? Zechor et Shabbat, remember the Sabbath, l'kadsho, and keep it for its holiness, would be a more accurate translation. Remember. What does that mean? Remember. It doesn't say observe it, does it? It says to remember it. Keep it in your mind.
To know it's.
You'll see, one of the things that's fascinating is that when we get to the book of Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, which repeats the 10 Commandments. Deuteronomy is a recap of the entire first 4 books, of the first 4 books. And yet, the rabbi's not here. Whoever wrote it, the group of people known as the Deuteronomists, who wrote not only Deuteronomy, but they wrote Joshua and Judges 1 and Judges 2, and they wrote a few books, probably hundreds of years after some of these other books were written. They didn't say Zechor. They said what? Every Friday night, what do we say? Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad. What does that mean? Shamor is to observe something. Okay? And what does that line in L'chad mean? Shamor v'zachor. You should observe it, you should remember, but dibur echad, in one utterance. So here the rabbis again are trying to explain, well, wait a second, there's an inconsistency here in the Torah. One place it says Zachor, and one place it says Shamor. It says, no, there's no inconsistency. There's another miracle here, that God uttered in one utterance both words, and the people miraculously were able to hear both words clearly. So that's the rabbinic explanation for those 2 words, and that's why the first paragraph of L'chad says Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad. Now I'll give you a little cute thing, and that is, since Zachor comes first and Shamor comes second, why does it say Zachor v'shamor b'dibor echad? Because Friday night, open your Sidurim and look at L'chad and you'll see the first letter of every paragraph spells out Shlomo HaLevi, the great Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, the Kabbalist from Tzfat in the 16th century. And he made an acrostic for his name. And if he did it, Shamor Zochor Shamor, he wouldn't have been able to have his name on there. So he switched the two. But technically it should be Shamor Zochor Shamor. Okay, so that's one thing here, is remember. Now, the interesting thing is that the rabbis tell us that there's two very, very separate things. What was said before is, Zohor is, you're supposed to keep it in your mind. All week long, we as Jews are supposed to be preparing for Shabbat. That's where this comes from. We're supposed to be thinking. And Jews build up, Orthodox Jews, build up and start, they'll see some beautiful thing in the store on Monday and they'll say, you know what, I'm going to buy that and I'm going to put that away for Shabbat because that's so special and so beautiful. So really traditional Orthodox Jews are constantly thinking of the week as just a build-up to Shabbat. The interesting thing is that one would think that the rabbis would help us out with that by putting something about Shabbat in our daily davening. In Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv, the word Shabbat is mentioned only one time. And it's actually not even, it's the name of the day of the daily prayers that we say at the very end of davening. There's a prayer for Monday, there's a prayer for Tuesday, and Hayom Yom Sheni B'Shabbat. This is because that's the way, technically, when we say Yom Rishon, the first day, it's Yom Rishon B'Shabbat. It's the first day from Sabbath. So technically, when we just say Yom Rishon or Yom Shlishi or Yom Revi'i, the full phrase is Yom Rishon or Yom Revi'i LaShabbat. It's the fourth day from the Sabbath. That's how we count. And most people don't read it because that's not the psalm. The psalm doesn't begin, that's just sort of the title above it. But if you read it, that becomes the only time in the liturgy of the entire week that the word Shabbat is mentioned. And I've discussed this with many rabbis, and none of them have an explanation why Shabbat was never included anywhere in the weekly liturgy. And later on in the course, we're going to do a beautiful analysis of how things change in the davening for Shabbat from the davening from the week. So people say, those who understand this concept, is that we must read the title of each of those daily psalms as to which one it is. Hayom Yom Sheni B'Shabbat. This is the second day of the Sabbath. And then you read that particular psalm, and that forces you, at least for that one moment in time, to mention and to think and to remember the Sabbath during the week. Okay, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all that work. Now that's interesting. What does this tell us? No welfare, guys. You are supposed to be out there working. It is a commandment to be out there working. This isn't optional. This is God saying, V'asita kol malachto. You will do all of your work. You're supposed to do your work during the week. You're not supposed to be sitting around waiting for the government to hand it out to you, unless you're sick or there's something else going on. A little politics there. But 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But what? But the seventh day is a Sabbath unto the Lord. And again, Shabbat, the word Shabbat is used for sure. In it thou shalt not do any manner of work. Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. And again, the rabbi talked about the difference between avodah, which is the daily term of work, and malacha, which has the connotation of some sense of creativity. And that's very, very important because you can't build, you can't finish, you can't do things that include the creative process. That's what you're not supposed to be doing on Shabbat. And we will get to, and we will learn why. There are 39, the rabbis have come up with 39 classifications of work. They're called the Avot Malacha, the father of work, is the father in the sense of a category. And then there are all of the subcategories that are developed off of the major 39 categories. So the seventh day is the Sabbath unto the Lord, and thou shalt not do any manner of work. Now here's interesting. Nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. Who's missing? The wife. Who's going to cook? Doesn't cook on Shabbos, but who's going to make the table and set everything up so the guy's coming home from shul? So the wife, now the rabbis say, no. When he's talking to, your son, your cattle, he's referring to the husband and wife together. So, and again, these are all, unfortunately, all of these terms are in the singular and not in the plural. It's your maidservant, singular. Your ox, singular. It's not the two of you. So, but again, that's just one of the interesting things.
Remember, it's the Middle East.
That's absolutely true. I mean, women in these days, for the children of Israel, were no less chattel than they were for every place else in the Middle East. That was just the norm of society. Women were not thought of as equal in those days. And guess what?
Still today.
No, come on, give me
Not
a break.
in other countries.
Give me a break. But no. But it's who wrote the books. It wasn't the women sitting around and writing the books. It was the men sitting around writing the books, and they didn't even think twice about leaving out your wife. They got your maidservant and everybody, but they don't include your wife. All right. For in 6 days, now, here's the question. So now it gives you what you're not supposed to do, what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to work, okay? You're supposed to remember. And now the question is why? And this is very important because you're going to see throughout the Torah and the rest of the Tanakh that the why changes. The why is not a constant. It seems very, very why. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested. And here it is, Vayonach. Now we have the first true, and menucha is the Hebrew word for rest, and Vayonach is absolutely, it is proper translation that they rested. So this is the first. We've gone through from Bereshit. We went through the whole business about not collecting the man and everything, but this is the first true time that the concept of resting was brought up. So they rested on the seventh day, wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So we've got a bunch of things, and now we have a reason why, and it refers back to our original story in Bereshit. And we're going to see later on that there will be other reasons that are given why including in the fourth commandment in Deuteronomy, which is not only the first word, Shemor v'Zachor, is different, but the entire explanation is different. So it's, I think that we'll probably stop here. I think this is a good place to stop. And maybe we'll answer any questions. Remember, you've got a combination of things to do, which is a mitzvah aseh. It is a positive mitzvah. And We have things that you're not supposed to do, which is a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. It's a negative mitzvah, all combined in this one commandment. Any questions? We'll stop here. There's a lot